This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Body Bags with Joseph Scott Morgan. Most folks out there know me as a death investigator. As a matter of fact, if you ever see me pop up on any of these television platforms or even on a podcast somewhere, they'll say death investigator, Joseph Scott Morgan. But you know, there's actually a bit more to me other than that from a professional standpoint. At this point in my life, I have spent as much time now in academia as I did as a death investigator. So you can call me a death investigator if you want, but I'm also a professor. And right now I teach at Jacksonville State University in Jacksonville, Alabama. And I've been here for just over a decade. The one thing that motivated me to start this podcast, Body Bags, is there's a need for people to receive an education in forensics, at least at a baseline. And considering that, I know that I have been infinitely blessed with the circumstances in my life and with the opportunities I've had. So with that spirit in mind, this is going to mark the first in an ongoing series of, let's just say it, an introduction to forensic science. And I want to offer this up to all of our listeners as kind of a peek behind the curtain. And maybe, just maybe, you'll come away with more of an understanding of my world and the world of forensic science. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags. Dave, to start off, I have to say, I got to confess a bit of, I want to make a confession here. When I started off as a young man, I was, let's see, how can I say it? I was compelled, motivated by envy and jealousy. And here's what I mean by that. After I got into the field, and mind you, I was uneducated. I came into my field and had no education, literally starting from the matter of fact, confession here, I was working on an associate's degree when I first started. Hadn't finished it yet, but I happened to be in the right place at the right time. And I don't know what day it happened on, but I suddenly found myself surrounded by people that had a lot of letters after their names. And I knew that not only did I have to have practical validation in my field, I'm not talking about law enforcement here, I'm talking about in forensic science, I had to have academic validation. Because let's face it, if you go to sit on a stand and you claim that you're a forensic practitioner and you're not degreed necessarily, there will be questions that will be asked. Well, why didn't you ever think it was important enough to get a degree? The cool thing about it is I had people that were all around me at that point in time that encouraged me. As dark as it got, as hard as it was, I had people that were around me that would push me. And so couple that motivation from that perspective, and then the motivation of jealousy and envy, wanting those things that I did not have, I wound up in a position where I began to teach. And it started out when I was still working at the medical examiner. I'd go to police academies and I'd do seminars and teach that way. But then the bug really bit me. I loved being in the classroom, and I loved taking all of that knowledge coupled with the horrible things that I'd borne witness to and trying to impart that. So you and I have been in ongoing discussions for a while now. And I thank you for your encouragement in this, because I think that it's a worthy pursuit on our part. And I want to be able to teach. I want this to be kind of the opening salvo, if you will, as we start out on this journey together, my friend.
It's interesting the way you approach this, Joe, as an educational thing. And it really comes from the fact that in the last couple of years, as forensics has become more of a player in terms of covering crime stories, not just within, say, the world of Nancy Grace, but beyond that. You're on TV, on networks, almost on a nightly basis, because people are interested in the forensics of crime and how they're used to solve crimes. And I think it's partly due to television. It's partly due to just the education of crime and the interest that it is, that there is. But there's a constant thing that keeps popping up, that the uneducated in all of us, that we don't know the difference between terms, the manner and cause of death. When we hear these things spoken about, it doesn't mean something very specific, but to the layperson.
Yeah.
But they all mean something totally different. And you and I've covered stories with you when you went, that's not even right. What they're saying on this network program is not correct terminology. They're different things. And I think it's important, before people open their mouths about something as important as forensics, about death and about studying crimes, that you better know what you're talking about.
Yeah, you do. And I've been caught by people, where I will misspeak about something, or, and of course the world is full of critics. I can't remember. There's a famous quote by Teddy Roosevelt about critics, and he's arguably my favorite president of all time, Teddy Roosevelt. And it was something to the effect that, being a critic really doesn't take that much effort. And doesn't that sound like something he would say?
It doesn't. You know what? Anybody can be a critic. Anybody can claim as a career. I'm a writer. Really? Have you been published? Not yet, but I'm a writer. Really?
Yeah.
What do you write? Screenplays. Okay. You can just claim things without proving it.
Yeah, you're right. You're right. I blush when people refer to me as an author, and I've written one book. I've participated in other books, but I've written one book. And people will say, well, I'm an author. And, I kind of shy away from that, because there are people that are out there that have written copious volumes of work out there that, are truly authors. I mean, it is their craft. It is their profession. It's not, what do they say? It's not a hobby. It is, in fact, a vocation. So with that said, I can tell you what is not merely a hobby for me, and that is forensics. And delving into that world. And one more little aside that I love about forensics is this. It is an applied science. It's not theoretical. Now, there are theoretical elements that are involved in all pursuits in forensics. You begin to think about chemistry and physics and biology, the three big ones, of course. And you can take elements from that theoretical science and apply it to solving crime, and there's a direct application. And I've mentioned this before, but I'll say it again. How many folks in the sound of my voice recall when you were in high school and you walked into a chemistry lab for the first time and you said you're going to take chemistry? If it was one of your requirements, in my school, it was a requirement. And I literally thought the teacher was speaking gibberish, like a made-up language, the first day. I think I was in the 9th or 10th grade. Biology, kind of easy to understand, but when you start to think about chemistry, for instance, it's so it's not very tangible. They try to make it tangible by giving you those molecular models. You remember those? And certainly you conduct experiments, but, but when you look at crime science and you think about perhaps taking that application of chemistry and applying it to drug analysis, that opens up a completely different world, where you're able to look at a substance and you might think that it's cocaine, or it could be baby powder for all you know. But that
actually had a case in Georgia where a woman spent time in jail while they tested cotton candy and came back as meth, and the woman lost everything. Kids got taken away, and turned out it was cotton candy.
Right.
And that happened in the last 5 years. We're not talking 100 years ago. We're talking in the last 5 years, somebody messed up forensics so bad, the woman lost everything.
Yeah, and that's been something, a through line also in the DNA world. There have been, I know one case that's up in New England, it may be Massachusetts. Lady was participating in something called dry labbing, and it was because she, relative to DNA, and she essentially took samples and was running them through the process without actually running them through the prescribed process. And there were people that went to jail as a result. And she's now, I think, if she's not in state prison, she's in federal prison. And those cases are thrown out. And, that's why you have to understand the basic science, and you have to understand form and function. So with that said, I really would like to begin to address some of these topics along the way. I think that we'll do probably one per week. And, reach out to us on social media. You can find me on Instagram and X and on Facebook to a certain degree. If you have a suggestion for not cases, but what would you like us to kind of tackle relative to forensic practice? And
I'll go even a step further. I've had a lot of people reach out via Facebook. I'll use Facebook because, to be honest with you, I got other stuff going on. I don't mess with all the others, and I know I should, and I'm going to work harder at it. Blah blah blah.
I don't want you to work harder at it.
But
sometimes if I get on X, I feel like I need to take my brain out and scrub it with Comet.
I always do.
It's the cesspool of humanity most of the time.
For those of you who have reached out to us, and we have followed up with a couple of you on different, and we're working on one now. I had to put some things off to the side due to some personal issues, but we're back into the swing of these. And if you've got something that you want to send, please do. But in particular, and this is something I was so glad you wanted to address, Joe, because manner, cause, mechanism. All right.
Yeah.
To me, I look at that and I'm just blow, they all are very dramatically different when you break it down and you're trying to talk about intelligently crime solving. I remember back, and I told you this before, and it was the Wayne Williams trial, the Atlanta child killing trial, that got my attention because it was one of the first, if not the first, one of the first that used fiber analysis to a huge degree with the carpet fibers that tied Nathaniel Cater to Wayne Williams to the trunk of his car. I believe it was Cater. But then I found out who the actual fiber guy was and where he got his degree. And that, for me, changed everything. Now, you just said when you started this, you were working on an associate's degree when you started the death investigation process. Is that correct? That's what you said?
Mm-hmm.
How does that happen? I'm not trying to divert where we're headed, but I need to know, what were you in a tier associate's program for that led you down this path? It's fascinating.
Criminal justice and biology.
Wow.
And that's how it started out. Yeah. And,
wow.
Yeah. And I knew that I'd always had a fascination with science. And of course, I love the law. I come from a family that has a lot of lawyers in it. And at one point in time, I thought that I wanted to become a lawyer at one point in time. And it wasn't because I had this huge passion for the law. Thank God, my uncle, who is quite famous in his own right relative to being a jurist, talked me out of it, actually. He tried to talk me into medical school, and he's like, as a matter of fact, he had said at one point in time, if you go to law school, I'll never speak to you again. And this is a guy that was well learned. He's actually taught at the National Judges Academy out in Reno for many years to teach new judges. That's how highly thought of he was.
To be crystal clear,
in
your
practice.
family is saying lawyer, doctor. Mine was saying, Dave, if you can't play sport, grab a shovel. That's all you got.
Well, I've probably learned more from people that are non-degreed than I have from those that are degreed. And here's why. The beauty of forensic science, like I said earlier, is an applied science. It's something practical that you can put your hands on, you can hold it, you can begin to understand it, and it's not too much different than a trade. As a matter of fact, just a little insight. Even in the world of forensics, if you have a master's degree in forensic science and you want to be a ballistics expert, for instance. Did you know that even with a graduate degree, you're still going to have to be in an apprenticeship, just like the old times, and sit at the feet of a master? There are certain determinations in the medical legal community that we are tasked with making. And from the perspective of how someone died and how we're going to categorize that and try to understand literally how it happened, we're going to start off there. Okay, because a subset of that is human identification, which is one of our mandates, but we're going to save that lecture for another time. But I think that it's very important, Dave, that we start off on this road that we often hear talked about in the news, and that is kind of the first major stop along the way when it comes to death investigation. That's manner of death. There are several cases that are in the news. One in particular, oh God, I hate even saying this woman's name, Karen Reed. I've spent many hours covering this, particularly on Court TV. And shout out to my friend Vinny Politan. And thanks for the opportunities that I've had, but it's rather tedious. But when it comes down to it, and you look at Karen Reed, the case is not about Karen Reed. The case for me is actually about John O'Keefe, okay? Boston police officer. He is discovered unresponsive, I think essentially dead in the snow, and he's got some pretty significant trauma. But Dave, they have charged, and that is the prosecution, the state, they've charged Karen Reed, of course, with, I think it's like vehicular homicide. In other words, they're saying that she is responsible for his death. Just because a prosecutor charges someone with homicide or murder, and it depends on the statute, how it's written in each state. Like, for instance, Georgia, our neighbor here, they don't refer to homicide in the law. They refer to it as murder. Talk about malice murder and all those sorts of things over there. But when it comes down to it, you're talking about death at the hand of another. Well, just because the prosecutor says that this is a homicide, that don't mean the medical examiner is going to call it that. All right. And this particularly, you see a big parting of the ways in this world when it comes to motor vehicle accidents, for instance. Okay. But here's the hang up with John O'Keefe's death. The medical examiner in his case could not even call his death an accident. And this is going back to when they made their final ruling, goes back to 2023. Okay. They could not even make a final ruling of accident or homicide. They actually left his manner of death as undetermined, essentially. Do you see?
But
and I know that's a bit confusing.
It is, a bit. It's a lot confusing. I assumed wrongly that you do the autopsy, you take all the circumstances into play, and you're able to determine what happened. How did this person end up dead? So the manner of death, what are we actually talking about with manner of death? Okay,
I want everybody in their mind's eye right now to envision a gigantic umbrella. And you know how umbrellas have those little ribs, like the little metal ribs that hold up? Well, I have something that's called the Morgan umbrella of death. All right. And each one of those little ribs, we have 5. So under each rib of the umbrella, you have homicide, suicide, accident, natural, and undetermined. And it's beneath that umbrella that we begin to try to marry up causal factors relative to death to try to determine how we're going to classify death and try to understand it and categorize it. This comes into play, obviously, in the criminal justice system. Let me tell you another big area where this comes into play, and people don't think about this, okay? Because you have to understand something. And I'm not just specifically saying you have to understand something, my friend. Everybody has to understand this. What the medical legal community does is not in fact, we're not in the business of merely serving the criminal justice system. Okay. We're also in the business of serving people involved in civil courts as well. Matter of fact, a goodly amount of the work that we do is demonstrated in civil courts. And I'll give you the best example. You have someone that has a certain type of insurance policy, for instance, and certain manners of death will not pay out. Okay. But if it's an accident, then you get double the amount. Okay. Do you see how
Double
there's like
indemnity.
big money? Yeah. Like
Make
the
a
movie
out of
Double
it.
Indemnity, so you've got, big money that's involved. Matter of fact, and I'll give you a little insight from the medical examiner's world. And this has happened countless occasions. And it's very sad. People don't hear about this very much. I've had wives that have shown up at the medical examiner's office, and they'll have stacks and reams of paper, Dave, wanting to get an audience with at least an investigator, hopefully the medical examiner themselves. And they're in tears. And they're in tears because we have yet to rule a manner on a death, and because they can't get funds released. And I'm sure that there are many people in sound of my voice that can identify having to deal with insurance companies about this, because the death has yet to be classified. I've sat across the table from people that were going to have their homes foreclosed on. I had one lady, I remember distinctly, had already had her car repossessed, and the electricity had been cut off twice in her home. And she did not have a job. She was sole dependent on her husband, and they had a rather robust insurance policy, and it hadn't been paid out. And she was living a hand-to-mouth existence. So there's a lot more to this than merely, what you might see in true crime, where we're trying to make these determinations like that. So a lot of this goes into, as you well mentioned, what kind of history can we get about the event? Well, if you look at John O'Keefe and his death, what do we understand about that scene and how his death came about? Is there enough information, and has it been effectively relayed to the state medical examiner there in Massachusetts so that they can make a determination about what they're seeing? Keep in mind, you're not pitching this to a lawyer. A lawyer has this massive canon of law that they can choose from. We've only got 5 of the manners of death. So we have to have enough information, and plus you're talking to somebody that is of a scientific mind. If it does not make sense to them logically, then they will not move forward. One of the most difficult cases, I think, and I've been involved in a couple of these over the years, for a medical examiner to make a determination on many times, is Russian roulette cases, because you can go down that road, and it's like one of the toughest colleges. I got to tell you this: one of the toughest college courses I ever took as an undergrad was logic. Aside from chemistry classes and everything else, I hated logic. And essentially, you're sitting there working on proofs, doing word problems. God bless all the philosophers out there, because it is a tough class. I was happy to take a C in that class, very happy. But when you begin to go down this road of what logically makes sense here, you can get off into the weeds relative to something like Russian roulette. And it's actually something I do with my students at Jacksonville State. I will tell them, okay, we're going to pretend that we're all medical examiners today. you're a coroner. I have to get them out of the mind of pretending that they're a police officer. And we'll go down this road and I'll give them a scenario and I'll tell you what it is real briefly. You got three guys. One guy says, hey, my grandpa is a retired police officer. He left me his revolver. And he says to the other two, do you want to see it? They've been drinking as well. Do you want to see it? And they say, yeah, enthusiastically. And then one guy says, you got any bullets? Let's load it up and let's only put one bullet in it. And then one guy says, let's play a game. So they sit down with the knowledge in mind that there is a certain risk of lethality here. And they spin the weapon and they go through the whole process. And of course, one winds up dying. You would be surprised. You might be shocked. I'm going to have you come to my class, Dave, so that you can bear witness to this, because I do this exercise every semester with my medical legal class. You'd be surprised how the classroom breaks down as to what they would rule the manner of death of as in a case of Russian roulette. It's amazing. Are you going to rule it as a homicide? Is it, in fact, a suicide? Is it an accidental event? Or is it undetermined? And I've actually had a few people say, well, it was natural. Yeah, I don't know. One person in the back shouted out natural selection. And so
It was not me. I was not in that class.
So I'm going to have you come to class just so that if any of our friends out there are
curious,
asking you to bear witness to this, you can actually kind of see the numbers and how and I do it with undergraduate classes and I do it with police academy classes as well when I'm teaching them about death investigation, because you have to have enough confirmatory scientific information to move forward. And does it fit within the parameters of what we're talking about? And let's just run through the manner real quick.
Well, let me ask you,
yeah, sure.
More than X's and O's, Joe, more than just X's and O's. I mean, what if, and I'm playing devil's advocate here, okay?
Please do.
You've got, in your scenario, what if my goal was, I'm trying to kill you off, and I've got us all drinking, and now I've got the gun, and I'm the one pushing this whole thing, and I'm gearing it up. And then, my goal was to have you dead, and you play along, boom, you shoot yourself in the head. The other guy goes, man, Dave was really working that hard. Hey, man, you're the one, does that come into play? Do you have time with police or investigators that they sit down and, hey, man, we found out some information that might have to do with this? Or is this purely
No. That's a good point, because lots of times we'll do this exercise from the perspective of the medical examiner coming into it cold and not having a lot of input from police. Now, if the medical, and this is a great example, let's just say John O'Keefe, what kind of data did they show up with to try to, because listen, the prosecutor in that case, they would really prefer for the medical examiner to rule this as a homicide. It just kind of bolsters their case. What did you show up with? And, you get into the I word again, you start to think about intent. Sometimes it's referred to as specific intent. And that plays into a little bit of to what we do. But our ruling and our view of things in the medical legal world is so desperately different from what the legal eagles do. If they came to us with that information, we've developed something that he said outside of what we saw at the scene. Yeah, watch this tonight. I want to get rid of both these guys. And that would certainly give us pause. But if we have no other information, then every medical examiner is going to view this as, what can I prove scientifically? And Dave, one more thing I want to say about this is that amazingly, medical examiners split on this topic just like the students do. Isn't that something? So you can go to a variety of different medical examiners. You can put them in a room, and let's just say it was a silent ballot, because nobody likes to look like they're on the outside. If you just threw it to them, of course, they've always got to debate one another. That's one of the things they love to do when they get together. But if you could just do it silently, you'd be surprised how this breaks out. But at the end of the day, you have to have enough information to call this manner of death a certain thing. And many times we're left wanting. as are many families. So we have manner considered at this moment, Tom. How are we going to rule it? Remember, we've only got 5 choices. But on the flip side, if you refer back to that imagery that I gave you of the umbrella, when it comes to a term that many people have heard for years now, it's the term cause of death. And cause of death and manner of death are so desperately different. So when we consider manner and cause of death, I would argue that probably causal factors are more easily arrived at than manner of death, because you've got a limited number of categories you can put any death into. But I can observe something and say, well, this is the causal factor in an individual's death. I'll give you, for instance, gunshot wound to the head. Okay. Well, the cause of death is going to be gunshot wound to the head. Okay. Now you think about, remember the umbrella I talked about? How many different of those categories under the umbrella of death will gunshot wound to the head fit under? Okay. We've got, what's the most obvious one? I think probably suicide, self-inflicted. We've got homicide. We've got accident. Although anytime someone, as an investigator, tells me this is an accidental shooting, my eyebrow goes up as high as it possibly can. Particularly when it comes to police officers and people in the military that have had familiarity with weapons. I'm going to take a long, hard look at that. And then you do have undetermined events. So gunshot wound to the head is kind of straightforward, but there are other things that come into play. And I got to tell you, one of the biggest bugaboos recently that has really, it's real burr underneath my saddle, is this Virginia Roberts,
Jeffrey
case.
Yeah.
Because it seems like anybody out there that has the ability to sling ink on a newspaper has been saying her cause of death was a suicide. I can show you article after article after article after article. Well, let me pause 1 second here and just say, you're a bunch of idiots. Did you get that last line? You're an idiot. Because suicide is not her cause of death. That's a manner of death. And still to this day, the territorial coroner has yet to give us the cause of death at the time of this taping. Okay, we don't know. What we do know about her case is that it has apparently been ruled, the manner has been ruled as a suicide, but that's not the cause of death. So you get hung up in this kind of, and it's not really a word salad. There aren't a lot of words involved here. It's rather simplistic. If you look at the law, it's highly complex. But when it comes to manner and cause of death, you think about her and you think about, and it makes you wonder, well, what could have brought about her death? Well, they're limitless. If they're saying that this is suicide, which, by the way, suicide is defined as death at one's own hand. And as you notice in that definition, which is the actual definition that's used in medical legal circles, death at one's own hand says nothing about intent, because intent is generally something that's left up to the legal side of the house to prove. We don't have to prove that. Now, it might influence us if they say they've been intending to do this or they have talked about it. We'll factor that in, but our definition is death at one's own hand. I'm Joseph Scott Morgan, and this is Body Bags.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed Human.